do something.
Welcome to the Ideal Millennial Entrepreneur Podcast. I am your host, Amir Estimo. Thank you for tuning in today's podcast episode, because you could be doing anything in this world, but the fact that you are listening to this podcast episode is much appreciated. First and foremost, I would like to just give you guys an update. The podcast has actually been rebranded from Think Generational Wealth to Ideal Millennial Entrepreneur Podcast. And some of you may wonder, why was that done? Well, the reason for that being done was because it was actually really time for the podcast to be rebranded. And one thing about podcasting is, especially if you're trying to grow, is finding that niche and where do you fit in, basically, or who is your target demographic and the ideal listener. And basically, you're trying to have an idea of who can listen to this podcast and who can learn from this podcast, find some information about his podcast and can basically, in a sense, grow. If there's some information that this podcast share, who's the ideal listener? And for a while, I have been thinking about that. And I just had to say, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I never really thought about a niche really like that, because some people say, well, you got a niche and because it's better. And, if you don't have a niche, you're talking to everybody, and everybody gets, basically, in a sense, doesn't really may not vibe with your message. The people who do, then you say, okay, these are the people that you would expect to listen to this podcast. And for me, for a while, that was what I was basically battling with. And also too, just to make the title more SEO friendly too at the same time. But the real reason is I've always thought about myself, me being born. So millennial is considered anybody born between 1981 to 1994. I've even seen anybody born from 1981 to 1996. So let's just go with either or, it doesn't matter. But we know the beginning part is 1981. And I said to myself, well, I feel that when it comes to this podcast, that could be my target audience, anybody in that. Because if I share any message, because I'm coming from a perspective of because most people probably my age is either they could be an entrepreneur or they're a 9-to-5 employee. But for me, I fit in kind of both that realm of 9 to 5, have a 9 to 5, and then working on your 5 to 9. And also too, probably married. You could be maybe even single, but you're a parent, because there's some things I'm talking about on the podcast could be from the eyes or the lens of someone who's a parent, maybe married, etc. So, but within that range. And not to say that anybody who listened to this podcast couldn't really learn from it, but from the perspective of who can really listen to this podcast and who's this podcast for, that's probably the target audience. But anybody can learn, because there could be a title I talk about here and anybody can learn from this topic. So to me, the podcast just needed to be rebranded. And I think that hopefully this is, not a knock, not to say that, oh, I'm just like really targeting this demographic. Yes, I am. But at the same time, anybody can listen to this information. So if you're someone who's on the path of being an entrepreneur, let's say you want to be a land investor, because for us, people my age and my age range, we are either building wealth or beginning to build wealth or not. Because a lot of the information that we could have learned maybe at home, maybe we didn't have a parent, maybe we come from Caribbean background or we come from an immigrant background, whatnot. and we just didn't have that knowledge. So I feel hopefully this podcast resonates with you. And if it still does, please like and share the podcast and subscribe to the podcast if you enjoy this content. This content comes out every Wednesday, 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. And the goal is to hopefully build a community of like-minded individuals where we're not gatekeeping information, but we're sharing. But anyway, so the podcast, today's episode, that's besides that. But today's episode, I'm going to talk about electric versus hybrid versus if you are in the car market today, the versus gas, I guess. But if you're in the car market today, how do you feel about the car market? Like, how do you feel about the auto market today? As we can see, the auto market, cars are now extremely expensive, and it's probably going to get even more expensive due to the tariffs that Trump is proposing. And how is it going to be to buy a car these days? I mean, like if you've been in the market or have been in the market or was in the market, what was your thoughts about buying a car? Because I haven't bought a car since '01. So for me, I first started off and I actually leased a car for probably about 2016 up until 21. Well, 23 or 24, I was actually leasing a car. I actually leased two vehicles. My wife, we leased three. The final vehicles we ended up just buying. And let me tell you something, folks. If you have an option to either lease or finance a vehicle, either do one or the other at that moment. And what I mean by that is when you lease and then you end up financing later, it actually costs you more money. So that's a lesson learned for me and my wife. When I actually broke down, I forgot there was somebody I seen on YouTube because we were thinking about, okay, what can we do, and like what would be what was our option? Do we continue leasing? And like for example, I leased my very first Honda Accord Sport. So I had a Honda Accord Sport, and I had that car from 2018 up until 20. I had that car from 2018 to 2021, and I got back in another lease, and that vehicle I ended up leasing from 21 to 24 or 23 or something that like 2 or 3 years. Then I end up buying the vehicle. I ended up buying this last vehicle, which was a 21 Honda Accord hybrid. I went to a hybrid route this time, and but then my lease was up, and I said, okay, you know what? Maybe I should just look at leasing again. And I mean, the lease payment jumped like $200. So you could tell the market shifted. And then for me, it in my wife's car. We leased it originally from 2016 to I think about 2019. We had a car released, a Honda CRV, and then all suddenly, then we went from 19 to 21. We leased a Pilot, and then we leased another Pilot in 21 to 23 or 24. Same thing. So both our cars, the final ones, we end up leasing. We end up financing at the end. But what I really thought about it at the end, I said, man, and then even my wife's car, when we went to go lease again when our lease was up, and then when we were going to go back in the market to go find another vehicle, because I was okay. I was looking at a couple of vehicles. So this is why I was saying, if you're in the market, what really fits you? So for me, I went from gas to a hybrid. And I just thought about it. I said, man, if I bought a gas, I kind of like that hybrid. I kind of like because I looked into the hybrids, and it was a really good deal at the time too. And Honda's had some really good hybrids. So for me, it was like, okay, it was a combination of, well, if you gas your car, if you're fueling your car, that's one thing. But at the same token too, when it comes to the environment, I was kind of like in that moment, like, well, at least electric vehicles sounds great. But then when I looked into electric vehicles, first of all, I was looking probably since before I had leased that vehicle in 21, I was looking at a Tesla. And I was looking at, like, that was my car. I had a wallpaper or screensaver, whatever you call it, of a Tesla. I was like, I was gonna get a Tesla. And then I happened to watch a TikTok of Kevin Frazier explaining his reason, explaining the whole how electric vehicle works. And and at the end, I was like, man, this sounds more like an inconvenience. But then when I thought about it, is for me, is someone who works from home. I work from home twice twice a day, twice a week. Sorry, I work from home twice a week, and then I go to the office 3 times a week. So that it really wouldn't have mattered in a retrospect if I had probably just went with electric vehicle. I'm someone, I don't like taking long trips on a vehicle. I don't really like driving. I'm not someone who enjoys driving a lot. I okay with I'm okay with I'm okay with just if I need to get somewhere flying. I'm not someone that enjoys driving on a long road trip. The most you probably get out of me is maybe 3 to 4 hours. That's just what it is for me, because it's just when I grew up growing up, especially when I went to college, I was really the only person that had a vehicle, and with all my friends. So if we needed to take a long road trip, and on top of that was manual, so no one knew how to really drive manual, and I had the car, so we would be driving everywhere, pretty much Florida, go to Tallahassee on weekends, we would go to Daytona, go to Miami, go back home. So for me, it was just the thrill of driving is just not there. Sitting in a car for X amount of hours, it just was not my thing anymore. But now, I mean, if you're going somewhere like close to, you're going somewhere close to 2 hour proximity, okay, I can hop on a car, drive, boom, and get there. But we're talking like you're taking a 6, 7, 8 hour. I have a limit, more like 4 hours, and that's it. I live in Texas, and I've had to travel to San Antonio, from Dallas to San Antonio. That's 5 hours, and I don't know. That's kind of a hit or miss for me. But for me, that was my thought process at the moment, because when Kevin Frazier was mentioning, that was like it was mentioning the income. It was mentioning basically his experience with having an electric vehicle. Now, when a vehicle needs to be juiced up again, I mean, you still have the same maintenance. Basically, you just don't have to gas up your car, and then you just have to, basically, then if you have like a Tesla, then you can charge it at your home. I mean, it was just at that moment I said, man, is it even worth really getting an electric vehicle? I don't know. So at that moment I said, looks like more of a inconvenience for me than convenience. So I went the hybrid route. I like the fact that you still have the electric aspect and you have the gas aspect. I kind of wanted to get out of that gas for me personally. Now my wife's car is gas, but for me, and that car burns gas, in my opinion. So if you're looking at a Honda Pilots do burn gas. So that for me, it was just like, okay, well, now looking at it and really looking at it and thinking about it 3 years later, my daughter is 18, and she eventually needs her own vehicle. And the thought process is, okay, do I give her my car with my car payment, and do I go get another car? And if I go get another car, what car would I actually be looking at? Do I go fully electric, or I stay within the hybrid range? And I think for me, I think looking at it now, first of all, electric vehicles are extremely expensive right now. And you have to basically really shop around to really find a good deal. I mean, Tesla's, that's probably the number one right now in the US. And then you have all these other car companies, from Hyundai, from Kia, to every company and their mama now is in the electric vehicle market. But my question to myself and anybody else who's in that market is, if you go get something that's not really a Tesla, how does that work as far as, charging station? How does it fully charge? The range, how much range can you get? Because on the hybrid currently own right now, is that I can get up to 492 miles of range on there. So, and I remember during the pandemic, when we were in the height of the pandemic, I was going, maybe when I was working from home primarily, because I spent 2 years working from home, And then primarily I would go maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, not even fill up the car. But now that I'm on the road more, I'm pretty much filling up every week. But I can go a week and a half on a hybrid and not have to fill it up. So my question then was, okay, how much range are we really losing now? If it's not basically Tesla, I mean, Tesla, I think I've heard it goes up to like 350 miles of range. And I'm not, so I just had to say, I said, okay, well, now that's one. Do I go fully electric or I stay within the hybrid range? I know for myself, I can't do gas because especially going to work and when I do have to go to the office, what I can really save more gas on is really either hybrid or electric because of my wife's car, we're putting anywhere between 100. I mean, sometimes we're only really filling up once a week, but for the most part, sometimes it could be twice a week, depending on, how much activity she got going outside of just, because she works from home, but just from her normal driving around, going somewhere here and there, dropping kids off to school, how much are we really filling up? So that was an aspect. I'm like, we have to kind of find that medium because now is with gas price. I mean, gas prices, especially here in Texas, is not too bad. I mean, you're getting anywhere between 2.59 a gallon, 2.79 a gallon, somewhere within that range. But in some states, you're probably paying 3.50, 3.70. So now you have to shift more towards going. Do I go electric, hybrid? How do we find that balance? And that's what I'm asking you is if you're in the market, what are you looking at? Like, what's important to you when it comes to electric, hybrid, or gas car? And if you go electric, why? Because even for me, I'm looking at it and it's okay. At first, it didn't make sense, but now going back now and looking at it and saying, well, maybe it probably would have been. It's not as bad because if you're not taking long road trips, you're someone like me. I don't. It's not like we travel to Houston a lot or travel to San Antonio or Austin. I mean, if it was any of those three, those probably, it's not that bad comparing. Those are 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hour drives. Austin is 3 hours. Houston is about 4 or 5 hours to give or take. And then San Antonio is about 5 hours. But we don't go to we don't go to those places very often. And then when we do travel out, it's either outside the country or outside the state. So to me, and if that happens, I'm fine. But now, especially these days of all these plane crashing and stuff like that, it makes you have to rethink that too, even that aspect of it. But anyways, if you're in the market for yourself, you're looking at a vehicle. What are you looking at? What's important to you? Is it what do you find that's important to you when you're making this car decision, especially in today's market? Because it just looks like cars right now are extremely expensive. I mean, I was looking at a car. I think it was the Honda Prologue. I think they call it Prologue or Prologue, whatever. And that car, they're asking like 60,000, 65. I'm like, for a car? Like, wow, where did this come from? 65,000. I can never see myself spending that money for a car. I mean, 65,000 is outrageous in my opinion. But the reason why I'm going back and saying this too, that it's probably better if you just finance or lease. Look at those two options. If you're going to lease, continue leasing. If you're going to finance, you know that, okay, you're going to have this vehicle. This is actually the vehicle you actually want. So that's where you got to really think about it because at the end, with the lease, you don't really, with the lease, the thing is that you actually end up like a car that probably would have cost you if you had just financed it. Maybe let's say you went finance route, 25,000 base price. And then after everything, let's say 30. I think for me, in my opinion, is when you go lease to finance, it's probably you're paying maybe $5,000 to $6,000 more. And on top of that, you really don't have because of what the dealer does or wherever you lease from. What they do is at the end of your lease, let's say that 3 year term. After that end of that lease, what they do is they have a price that they say, hey, this is the bottom price, and there's really no negotiation on your end. Versus if you were to go just buy a car and finance a car from the get go, you have more negotiation power. And I didn't realize that until the end of our lease. And then it was like, well, I was like, hey, no, what the dealer has, that's it. So, that's what they think the value of the car is. So that was to me a con. You end up finding later on from lease to finance that if you go that route, just know that if you go that route, you're going to have to think about that because in that car, you probably end up, that was like 21. Let's say you got that car and at the end it's like 21. That's what they're saying, hey, the car is worth. But if you probably finance it again, you can probably cheat, get it down, maybe 19, 18, depending. And then you have a smaller monthly payment. So those are some cons that I really realized learning on going from that lease to finance route, that you don't have the negotiation power and it actually end up costing you more in the long run. Now, if you go the leasing route, obviously leasing, you're going to pay a little bit less money currently versus financing. If that depends on if you put a lot of money down. But at the end, what's important to you? Are you traveling a lot? If you lease, you know that you have a mile that you can't hit. And if you go over that, man, at the end of the day, you might as well, like if you're someone that drives 15, 20,000 miles a year and you're only allowed eight, let's say you're allowed 12,000 miles, which is your max, then probably leasing is not for you. You might as well just finance a vehicle. But if you're driving that much too, within 3 years, that's like 60,000 miles you're putting in your vehicle. That is a lot of wear and tear already. And that means you're going to probably end up, most vehicles, depending on the brand, is you're probably going to end up spending more money anyways down the long run. So I just wanted to share this with you guys, just kind of get you guys the thoughts on thinking about the market today, especially here in the US, is why cars are so expensive now. It's just extremely expensive. And is it even worth it? Is it good to just continue leasing a vehicle? And if you do lease, what type of vehicle are you looking at? It's good that we have options. I think that's the best thing that could have happened in the auto market was having an option, just because back then it was always either gas. And if you're growing up, my time, you had manual and automatic, and that was it. But they're all gas. There was never really electrical. There was hybrid, and then there's gas. It was gas, and that was it. And then now the fact that now we have all these options, you can go look at an electrical vehicle, you can go look at a hybrid, you can look at a gas or stay with a gas vehicle. Do you like trucks? Do you like mid-sized vehicles? Do you like full-size vehicles? Do you like kind of like what they call mini SUVs? Something like a CRV, something like a Toyota RAV4. And then what matters to you? Brand. Or have you always been someone who's stick to Toyota, or have you always been someone that stick to Honda? And what's those matters to you? Is it, hey, I need longevity? Most brands that Hondas, Toyotas, etc., you're gonna get longevity, and you can run those cars 100, 120, 100. You can get those cars only keeping up with the maintenance. Those could be a good thing. So, anyways, today's podcast was basically just me kind of sharing with you guys that, hey, if you're in the market today, what are you thinking? Like, what do you see? Is it even worth it right now to be in the market to buy a vehicle, or you just go the leasing route? So I appreciate you taking the time. Again, share this podcast if you enjoy the content. We're on our way to 10,000 downloads, and any contribution you can do helps. Much appreciated. Much love. Peace. See you next week.